build a business that is now reflective of this brand new identity.
What's up, Jake? Welcome back to the show. Super excited to have you here.
Thanks so much, Tori. Glad to be here.
It's been a bit since we've gotten to hang out in person, since I've been on the road, and I'm just pumped to catch up with you and see what's new, because last time you were on this show, we got such great feedback from that episode, the 3 most common lies that we believe and tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it was because so many people can relate, and they're just like, it just hits home. And that's why I wanted to have you back on the show, because
Sure.
you always have such valuable insights, and I know you're so committed to your own growth that as a result of that, you're just naturally getting new downloads and new things you're learning. So I just want to catch up, what is it that you've been spending time on? What is it that you've been learning and that's been coming up for you? Because you had a pretty kind of traumatic incident happen not too long ago that I would imagine brought up some things for you to look at. Can you tell people what happened and kind of what you've been experiencing over the last few months?
Yeah, absolutely. Happily. I think it's been over a year since our last episode. So
yeah,
obviously a lot of changes, a lot of pivots and transitions that have happened over that time. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I had a traumatic incident, a traumatic acute health incident about almost 4 months ago to the day, actually. And it's just really interesting because what I then experienced within myself as a result of the incident, and I'm obviously happy to share more specific details about it, but just allowed me to further embody the work that I'm constantly inviting my clients into, and I'm constantly encouraging that other people do in an effort to reach their highest potential. Mm-hmm. Almost 4 months ago, I suffered a new onset seizure while I was on the golf course. And unfortunately, I happened to be standing on the 0.01% of the golf course that has concrete on it. And when I fell, I hit my head and suffered a traumatic brain injury. So as you can imagine, life changed pretty dramatically. All of a sudden, my short-term, my mid-term memory just quite simply was not there. I wasn't able to show up for work with my clients in my relationship in the way that I'm used to, because my normal level of energy and motivation and inspiration just was not there, and went through a pretty significant season of depression, anxiety, and sadness, which apparently is really common when it comes to traumatic brain injuries, all of which was very new to me. So of course I was like, what is going on? The resources that I am used to in terms of my energy, my emotional intelligence, are just not there. I'm not able to access them. And because of that, I experienced this pretty prolonged season of depression. Ultimately, I think it was the necessary suffering that everyone must go through as they transition from the first half of life to the second half of life, which we'll get into a little bit later. But for context, only a few weeks prior to the seizure, and I'm not sure you even know this, a few weeks prior to the seizure, I was diagnosed with adult ADHD, which I know is something that you experience as well.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think you've mentioned that briefly in passing, but we haven't gotten into it. So was that a surprise for you, and putting puzzle pieces together?
It didn't necessarily come as a surprise, but it's definitely one thing when you go from, I think I might have this, and I resonate a little bit with it, to being told, no, you absolutely do have this, and receiving that diagnosis. And so for me, what that looked like was all of these things that I had historically labeled as character flaws. Now all of a sudden I had context for, because I was like, oh, this is just how my brain works. But with that, as you can imagine, because I had been labeling all of these things as character flaws, like a lack of consistency and self-discipline, all of these other things that are very common for people who experience ADHD, it caused me to experience an overwhelming amount of grief and sadness, because when you're judging yourself or making yourself wrong for something, even if it's unconsciously for decades, and you all of a sudden bring a certain level of conscious awareness to it, well, then you have to experience the emotions that come with it. Really, it just caused a prolonged state of hypervigilance and hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen in the bloodstream, which ultimately caused my seizure. At least this is what my neurologist believes caused the seizure, because everything came back clean as far as the EEG, MRI, CAT scans. So, they had no reason to believe that it was caused by a tumor or a blood clot or anything like that. And so that's what they were left with as far as what ultimately caused the seizure and led me to where I am today.
I mean, any health concern or accident is just, it's so scary, because all of a sudden your body's not doing what you know that it can do, and that it's not functioning in the way that it's designed to, or that you are used to. And so there's inevitably this emphasis on identity that comes up. It's like, who am I without these things? Who am I without my ability or my tool set of, energy or focus or emotional intelligence, as you were talking about? How did you reconcile that? Obviously, you went into, a seasonal depression around it, of just being like, what the heck is going on? But how have you been able to kind of move through that season, and what has it asked you to do? Like, what have been the lessons that you've been taking away? Because I know you're a go-getter, and you like to get things done, and you have so many projects that you're working on, and you serve people in such at a high capacity. What happens when you're asked to slow down? How was that?
It's a really, really good question, and I'm glad that you asked that, because for me it was, in short, completely and fully surrendering to it. Because like you mentioned, there's really nothing that you can do. And this is really common in terms of what we see happen when someone transitions over from the first half of life to the second, and I'm happy to explain more about that. But what that looks like for most people is they experience death, disease, or divorce, when all of a sudden they are quite literally led to the edge of their resources, who they've become up until that point and how they've operated up until that point, and they can no longer do so. And in that moment is when we experience the necessary suffering that I talked about, when all of a sudden we can't be the same person that we used to be, and we can't continue to show up in the way that we used to show up. So it requires this dying, right? This dying to our old self in an effort to cross over and become who we were meant to be, right? It's a return home. In the world of personal transformation, they say that so much of it is unlearning, not learning. Thankfully, I had the awareness around what what I was in for, for lack of a better phrase. But most people don't.
Right.
Most people are not aware of what is actually going on and why it's so important in that moment to fully surrender and give yourself over to that process. Because what typically ends up happening is the person self-sabotages, right? In an effort to go back to who they used to be and return to their former way of doing and being and living, rather than fully crossing over and embracing the new identity that comes with this experience of waking up.
Yeah. Because it's what you just described, death, disease, or divorce are, for a lot of people, they're rock bottom moments, right?
Correct.
They're these moments where once you experience it, you can't go back. Ultimately, what you're describing is you're different. Things have changed, and there's no reversing it. And so then there's this period of acceptance or resistance. We either fight it, and we're in an internal battle, and that's, I think, natural for so many of us. We're like, it shouldn't be this way. That was my story. It's like, shouldn't be this way. I shouldn't, my body shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't have gotten that diagnosis. We shouldn't have to deal with cancer. It's not our fault. Why is this happening? Or whatever it is,
Totally.
Why did they do that to me? They shouldn't have done that to me. And anytime we're in that state, mentally, it's like we're saying we know better than God, almost that we are God. Like we know what side of the sky the sun should shine in, right? It's like, oh, it shouldn't be over there. It should be over there.
Right.
And when we recognize like how crazy that is, that we think we know best, like that's, I think the default response, because we want to control it and we want to figure it out. We want to understand why things are happening so that we can go back to safety and security and comfort and quote unquote normalcy. But as you know, Jake, and those listening, like the only constant in life is change. That's the only guarantee is that we're all going to die and that things are going to change. And it's the natural evolution of our planet and our species. And we either can get on board with that or we can fight it and live in so much pain and suffering. And so like, I totally hear what you're saying. And I recognize that in my own story. I also can imagine that for some people who may be like things are good, they're like, I don't want that to happen to me. Like I'm good how I am, you know. That sounds scary and hard, and I don't want to go there. You know, can you talk about the difference between growing up and who we kind of are conditioned to be and this idea of ourselves, and then how that evolves and how that we're asked to change and what you say, come home to actually the truth of who we are, not who we think we are?
Yeah. So for some much needed context, and thank you for pivoting the conversation in that direction. You know, when we're really young, when we're children, right, we basically develop a part of our psyche known as our admired identity, which answers the question, who do I need to be? What do I need to do? And how do I need to be perceived in order to be loved, accepted, and successful? Right? So we're constantly engaging the world around us, our primary caregivers, and we're asking ourselves that question unconsciously, consistently throughout our childhood. And we're adapting our personality, or better yet, developing a personality to answer those questions, those fundamental questions around who do I need to be, what do I need to do, and how do I need to be perceived in order to receive love, acceptance, and ultimately be successful. But it's not actually who we are. It's an adaptation. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism that allows us to avoid pain. Because what happens if we don't do that? Well, then we're not loved, we're not accepted, we can't be successful. And so, as you can imagine, as we go throughout life, as we grow up, right, we unconsciously seek for ways to continue to reinforce this identity, this persona, which literally means character, the character that you are playing. That is not actually representative of who you really are. It is simply who you've become in an effort to be loved, accepted, and successful.
Who was that version of Jake? Like, who was that for you? Who did you become in order to get love and acceptance and ultimately to be successful?
The role of the high performer, right? I grew up as a 3-sport athlete, was really successful in my corporate career. And then obviously that just carried over into entrepreneurship, where, you know, I'm constantly looking at what's next. How do I get to that next level of achievement or success, which I've developed over time as a skill, right? Because I started doing that unconsciously when I was a really, really young kid.
And the trick with that one is that it's praised. You get so much recognition and praise, and it takes a lot of self-awareness to actually be able to reflect on that and see that this is who I've learned to become because I was seeking out approval and acceptance and love, and also untangle that from who was I before I learned how to perform.
Right. Well, and that is the really, really big issue that we see with a lot of people, especially those who identify as a high performer or a success-driven person, entrepreneur, athlete, whatever it may be, is that they don't know who they are apart from that persona. And so when all of a sudden the resources that they have relied upon in an effort to keep that persona in place, when all of a sudden that is taken away, what they end up experiencing is an incredible amount of grief, depression, sadness, suffering. I mean, if we really want to get into it, this literally speaks to the process of the hero's journey,
Yeah.
right? The hero has to go into the cave, right? And the cave literally is defined by suffering and darkness.
Yes, the darkness.
Right. But very few people want to go there because it's so inherently uncomfortable and confronting. Because this persona, when you think about it, like I mentioned, at least for me, it became a skill. I became this incredibly high performing athlete when I was a kid, and then on into adulthood, this incredibly high performing executive and now entrepreneur, influencer, what have you. But oftentimes, our greatest skill is actually an adaptation or an overcompensation to avoid feeling pain.
Well, it's like, why is the comedian the big comedian? Why is the performer the performer? It's funny how you can look at your siblings and see the persona they took on. And that like,
Totally.
oh, well, that one's taken, so I'll be this. You be, you be the one that gets in trouble and acts out and gets attention and is the rebel and the renegade. And then I'll be the good girl
Right.
that follows the
100%.
rules.
Yep.
And you know what I mean? And it's
Totally.
just like, you get to dress up in this costume and I'll be this. And then we've been it for so long, we think it's who we are. We're like, oh.
Correct.
And then, like, I dated a guy that played professional basketball during college and right after college. And when I watched him go through the ups and downs of being in the big leagues and then sent down, being in the big leagues, and every time having such an identity crisis around it. Because, and we see this, I've had a lot of friends who performed or played at collegiate and professional levels, and it's always the same thing. It's like, I don't know what to do or who I am without this title. And we saw it all through COVID when people, whether it was executives or lawyers, they didn't have their big office to drive into. And it's like, who am I without this? And it requires us then to either, like you said, go into the darkness, go into the cave, and actually self-reflect and ask ourselves these questions and care to know the answer, like actually want to know. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe you agree with me, maybe you have a different perspective on it, but like if we don't go there, what is the alternative? The alternative is living in misery and confusion our whole lives about what do we offer or where is our value outside of what we can do or what we used to do.
Yep. 100%. What we're really talking about, right, is this process of waking up, where we shift from this stage that can be defined as growing up, right, where we seek to become successful. The focus is on winning and achievement and really establishing, a successful reputation, image. Well, waking up involves the killing of that persona, where we literally die to that persona, because this is like our admired identity, so that we can step into and fully embrace and live into our authentic identity. And what happens when we do that is we're able to go on, what Richard Rohr refers to as this further journey, where we're able to craft and create a life that is authentic to who we really truly are deep down. And when you think about the number one regret of the dying, what is the number one regret of the dying? It's that I wish I had lived a life true to myself and not according to other people's expectations. Number one regret. And so when you think about that, you realize very quickly that most people never actually go through this process. And if they are confronted by it, because, let's be real, pain is an inherent part of the human experience. If they are confronted by it, they want nothing more than to go back to who they used to be before this necessary suffering that we're talking about, right? Death, disease, divorce, which are the most common things that really thrust people into this dying process that is necessary in order for us to live up to our true potential and embrace our authentic identity. Most people have it backwards. They think that they need to achieve their way to their full potential, when really you need to die your way there.
I think life is always speaking to us. We can choose to listen, or we can be forced to to look at the things that we've been avoiding. And that typically comes in the forms of events that it's like, no, you're not gonna run from this anymore. Like now you're being forced to deal with this. Like your body's been telling you for, 5 years that there's something going on and you've been ignoring it. And so now you're having to face the consequences of those choices, because I really believe, like, as human beings, our power lies in our ability to choose and say, like, I'm going to actually sit with this emotion and feel this thing, or like look at this thing that's hurting me,
Right.
or I'm going to continue to numb it. I'm going to continue to distract myself. I'm going to continue to go for the next best thing. So I don't have to feel. And we live in such a culture where it's like everywhere we turn, it's like, here's another way to manage your pain, or to like relieve your pain, or to stop feeling
Right.
any pain.
Yeah.
And we have such a low tolerance for any type of discomfort. And then
Correct.
that's why I think these, the hero's journey can be so intense for people, because it's in such stark contrast to the very comfortable life that we've been living before. I want to take a quick second to invite you for an opportunity to join me for an exclusive 75-minute virtual breathwork class. Now, if you've never heard of breathwork before, this is one of the most powerful modalities that you can use to relieve stress, become more creative, sleep better, and heal yourself from the inside out. Breathwork has absolutely changed my life. And if you want to hear that story, you can find an entire podcast episode called You Are the Drug, where I actually talked to my teacher, Samantha Skelly, who helped me go through a 7-month trauma-informed breathwork facilitator program. And I'm not the same after experiencing not just that program, but learning how to use my breath as a way to calm my nervous system, as a way to regulate when I'm going through stressful or overwhelming situations, and how to really just get out of my head and into my body. The best way I can describe it is the difference between knowing that you're okay, knowing that you're loved, and actually feeling your own love for the first time. And I struggled for so many years with body dysmorphia and feeling like I was crawling out of my skin, almost like wanting to trade my body in for another one, because I had such a level of discomfort feeling anything. Breathwork helped me to feel again and love again and connect with my intuition and my creativity and my sensuality in ways that I'd been so blocked from, I thought I would never be able to reconnect with. But breathwork helped me do that. And I want to offer you guys an opportunity to experience that for yourself. I've had such an enormous response from the clients that I work with around how transformational this has been for them. So I've decided to host a monthly breathwork class, and you can join me virtually from anywhere in the world. It's 75 minutes in a facilitated, safe space with other breathers. And all you have to do to join is go to my Stan store. You can find it on my Instagram or TikTok link in bio. We'll also put the link in the show notes for you to make it super easy. And it's only $25 to join. We have upcoming sessions in July on the 13th and August on the 11th. So go over to the link that's in the show notes for Breathwork and you can sign up there. All right, without further ado, we'll jump back into the episode.
This theology, if you will, is very, core to a lot of ancient mythology. When you think about like Homer and the Odyssey and a lot of other instances where, you kind of have to go through hell to get to heaven. And most people, like you mentioned, they resist this process because they want to avoid the pain and the weakness involved, when in reality, pain and weakness is literally the way.
Well, it's the fire. Like, you have to be refined in the fire.
Correct. You have to go through the cave. And that's what, a lot of ancient mystics say, that it requires this necessary suffering in order to rock us and wake us up to the reality that we have been living in this persona, in this admired identity that is not actually who we are. It's just who we've become in an effort to be loved, accepted, and successful. Right? So few people ever go through that process.
Yeah, and what I want people to hear is that, like, if you are in a season right now and you are suffering and you are going through it, and maybe you've been completely blindsided by life and you did not see, this breakup coming or this, accident coming. It's like, I wasn't prepared for this and I don't know how I'm going to get through this. It's like, you're in the fire right now for a reason.
Right.
And I want you to hear, like, it's not because you're doing life wrong.
Right.
Glennon Doyle says, life isn't hard because you're doing it wrong. It's hard because you're doing it right.
Correct.
This is part of the growth process. It's part of your evolution. So can you try on the belief that maybe you're exactly where you need to be, experiencing exactly what you need, and that there's nothing wrong. It's actually part of your process and your refinement.
Yep.
If I'm completely honest, Jake, I'm still in this process. I am not beyond it. There's still parts of me that are connected and gripping on to this ego identity or this admired identity of being this girl that fit into this box and looks this way and does these things and acts this in these ways, and that's appropriate and that's labeled good.
Yep.
And it's so hard for us to detach from that story and that belief that if I'm anything other than this, I'll be abandoned, rejected, unlovable, unwanted, alone.
Right. Which, somatically speaking, soma meaning body, our nervous system experiences everything that you were just mentioning, rejection, abandonment, etc. It literally experiences it as I might not make it. It does not know the difference between those things and dying. And so there's so much internal resistance that comes up when we experience the possibility of those things, right? Not even the reality of those things, but the possibility of those things. So we are constantly trying to protect from experiencing those things or feeling the emotions attached to those things, when in reality we have to experience those things and the emotions attached to those things so that we can separate ourselves from this identity and return home to who we actually truly authentically are.
So how do we do that?
Oof.
Is there a process?
Yeah.
Is it trial and error? How do we disentangle who we thought for our whole lives?
Yeah.
This is who we are, and come home, if you will, to the truth of who we are, because that feels so unfamiliar.
Sure.
Right? That feels so, it's like, who is this version of me? Who is that person?
Right.
And how do you know when you find it, as opposed to a different version or a different adaptation of
Sure.
a similar persona, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. Great question. Well, I think first and foremost, if you're familiar with the hero's journey, every hero needs a guide. Every hero needs a guide to be able to usher them and guide them through this dying process, through the cave, so that they can come out on the other side and, slay the dragon or ascend to the mountaintop, whatever that looks like. And in the language that we've been using, right? Reach your full potential, whatever that specifically looks like for you. Achieve your God-given purpose or your divine purpose. So what that has looked like for me historically, and you're in the entrepreneurial world, so we hear this all the time, the importance of hiring a mentor and getting consistent mentorship. So I think it really just comes down to getting the right mentorship to support you in this deconstruction process, because that's what it really is, right? Is you separating yourself and who you are from this identity that you've been unconsciously building, creating and reinforcing for decades, so that you can transcend it and live up to your highest potential. So I think mentorship is key. And when you really think about it, what is the admired identity? How is it built? How is it really established? Well, it's built around trauma, right? And pain, because we experience pain, right? We experience pain, we experience trauma, whatever that looks like, whether it's emotional, physical, or otherwise, as a child. And so what does our psyche do? It adapts. It overcompensates in an effort to not experience that again. And that's how this over time, as we grow older and go through adolescence, we further build and create this identity in an effort to not experience or re-experience the pain that we did growing up. And so it requires that we confront that. We have to confront that. In terms of modalities, like, I don't think there's any adequate replacement for therapy, for quality therapy. I think it's becoming now more and more mainstream that like your mental health is just as, if not more important than your physical health, your emotional health, all of these different things. And so we're now starting to see, going to therapy as like an essential part of living. High quality therapy is massively important, counseling, and then also coaching, right? Which is the world that you and I live in, where after someone has worked with a clinician or a professional in an effort to heal from their trauma, because we all have emotional trauma, then working with a guide to really transcend that identity so that we can start to actually build a life, or, in the case of entrepreneurs, build a business that is now reflective of this brand new identity, which is when we start to answer your second question, which is when our desires, our goals really start to transform. Because like I mentioned, in this first half of life, the goal is really all focused around success, achievement, money, right? In entrepreneurship, we see this where the focus is around having a cash-based business, right? How do we as a business make as much money as possible? And when you go through this dying process, this transformational process of moving from your admired identity to your authentic identity, those things don't matter nearly as much anymore. And so all of a sudden you see this transmutation, or experience this transmutation of your core motivations and goals for yourself. And what we often see in entrepreneurship is people shifting from focusing on a cash-based business to a results-based business. How do I have the biggest, deepest impact as possible? How do I serve the most amount of people? How do I be in highest contribution, give back, be generous? We have become so habituated, and we have put so much time and energy and effort into building up this admired identity. We need to spend a significant amount of time, and one could almost argue an equal amount of time, into deconstructing it. There's this concept called the Saturn return. It takes 29 years for Saturn to revolve around the sun. In astrology, they say in the first half of life, in the first 29 years of your life, the theme is all about building up this identity, right? And further reinforcing it, propping it up, if you will. And the second half of life, the next 29 years of your life, is all about deconstructing that identity. And in astrology, they say if you don't start that process right around your 29th birthday, you basically don't get the chance to do it again until your next Saturn return, which is when you are 58, right? And what happens at like right around age 58 for a lot of people? A midlife crisis, because they haven't done the necessary work when they were right around 29 or 30 to deconstruct this identity, and all of a sudden they wake up one day and they're like, oh my gosh, this job, this marriage, this life, this career that I've worked so hard to build, I don't want anything to do with it. And it usually takes what we talked about earlier, death, disease, or divorce, to wake them up to the reality of that, right? And then you see people like, leaving their marriage of 30 years, or like quitting their job and, becoming a nomad and traveling the world, or becoming a monk, or, buying a motorcycle, or whatever it is. In spirituality, right? It's the construction, deconstruction, and then reconstruction process that if you're on a spiritual journey, you basically must go through if you want to ascend, right? Or reach your true potential, live your higher purpose. As we've stated before, though, that's super uncomfortable for people. Unfortunately, most are continuing to live in old ways of being and doing. Like when we're little kids, what matters to little kids the most? Playing. So one of the things that we see the big mistake people make in an effort to continue to reinforce their admired identity is disproportionately focused on success, but at the cost of their health and their hobbies and their overall level of happiness. So many adults are not prioritizing play, but when we're kids, what matters the most? Playing. You even think about dolphins. Dolphins are the only animals to have evolved out of the water, but then back into the water because they're like, we're like good in the water. Scientists and biologists have studied dolphins so much. Well, what is the number one thing that dolphins prioritize outside of eating? It's play. So here you have one of the smartest animals on the planet, the only species to evolve out of the water and back into the water. And what do they spend more time doing than anything else? Playing.
Yeah. It's essential. It's part of to your point about coming home, it's our natural state. It's a natural state and part of who we are because we don't have to be taught how to play. It's like baked in to who we are. Like we're taught we grow out of it.
Correct.
We're taught how to work, right? We're taught, but kids naturally play. It's just what we do.
Yeah, it's part of our divine blueprint, like you mentioned. It's baked in, so to say, or as you put, where nobody has to encourage us as kids to go play. We just naturally do it.
Yeah, and to use our imagination and to be creative and to create. What we've just wound up creating is a world that is hyper-focused on performance instead of cultivating our creativity and our intuition and our playfulness and all of the things that are way more closer to what we're like, who we truly are. And so we just like journey away from it throughout our lives, and that's the coming home. It's coming home to like, who was I before I learned who I was supposed to be, who I needed to be in order to be loved or in order to survive ultimately. So where are you at in this process? What are your biggest takeaways from this season of your life? I know you've woken up before this, but I imagine it was
Sure.
like just a resubmersion into looking at who am I and what does that mean to me and what's true for me now in this stage of your life?
Totally. That's a great question. Yeah, it's just a deeper level or the next level that I got to go within myself personally to further embody the work that I already do with my clients and am constantly preaching to other people. It's another layer of the onion, if you will. But really what I've begun to embrace is slowing down. And really contemplating and considering the question, like, who am I without the need to perform? And what would I be doing without the pressure to perform? Because I don't know about you, but for me, the answer isn't working. It's not spending more time working. It's actually spending more time doing the things that I love the most, which are cooking for people that I'm excited to be around, traveling, hiking, camping, spending time with friends and family. And so for me, it's really just embracing this season of slowing down and reinvesting more time and energy into those things. And furthermore, actually seeking, how can I include more of those things in my work? Right. So for example, I'm hosting a retreat for men in September, because I love travel. I love adventure. We're doing it in Zion National Park, which is one of my favorite places on earth. And we're going to be cooking while we're there. And so it's incorporating all of these things that I love, that I secretly gravitate to without anyone's encouragement or permission, right? Because I firmly believe that we always silently gravitate towards the things that we love the most. And so when you start to incorporate and bring these things into your work, into your purpose, into your life, well, what happens? Inevitably, your quality of life and your overall level of happiness increase. And so for me, it's just spending more time doing those things and seeking to further incorporate those things into the work that I'm already doing with my clients and in my purpose.
It's so good because it's like, it's the process of not just talking about it, but then like walking it out, living it out, embodying it at a deeper level. And I think this whole conversation is a perfect pairing to our initial conversation on this show, which I encourage people to go back and listen to, because all of what we're talking about hits on one of those lies that we talked about in that episode, which is I am what I do.
Yeah.
I am what I do. And so this entire conversation, what we're really talking about is reevaluating and remembering that our worth, our self-worth isn't dependent on our performance. Like that we've gotten away from the human being and we've redefined that as human doing. And it's
Totally.
This new season of life that is like less focused on I am what I do. I'm more engaged and more concerned about who am I being when I'm doing anything, right?
Sure.
How am I showing up when I am doing stuff? Who am I being in those moments? It's like, let me focus on the beingness of being with my friends and being in community and being of service, of just being in nature, being still, not just like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing I can cross off the list?
Totally. Yeah. So that's kind of been what I've been exploring and contemplating and spending more time investing in.
So beautiful. And I love that you're creating spaces for other people to do that, like your retreat. What else do you have going on? I mean, you coach some of the best in this space. I've had the privilege of working with you. What does business look like for you right now? And if people want to know more about what you've got going on, how to connect with you off the air, tell them where they can find you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So best place to connect with me is on Instagram. My handle is I am Jake Kauffman, Kauffman. But as far as what else I have going on, working on wrapping up my book. So well into that process. We're moving on into further stages with the editing. And so looking for that to be published more towards the end of the year. We don't have a publishing date yet, but if you follow me on Instagram, obviously we'll keep you posted and up to date with all things regarding the book.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And men, if you're interested in the retreat, yeah, definitely go check out Jake's work. He works with both men and women. But yeah, that sounds like an awesome opportunity to hang out with the boys if you're looking for community and looking for people who are committed to growth. Jake is one of them, and he knows many of them. So just thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the path and continuing to share, your learnings and wisdom as you walk it. I appreciate you for being a friend and a mirror for me, and you're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thanks so much, Tori. I appreciate you having me.
Okay, till next time, you guys, go be coachable. We love you, and see you next week on the Coachable Podcast.